All right, so welcome everybody. This is going to be a session packed with new information about the FileMaker 2025 or FileMaker 22, as I like to call it. Um, Let me start by sharing my screen so we have something to look at. You may already have come across these. We've written a bunch of content on the new release, and I'll use the executive summary as our guide today. But certainly, this is not me just talking to you. Feel free to ask any old questions. I want this to be as much of an Ask Me Anything session as we can make it. I'll try and convey the highlights of what's in this new release. And there's going to be a slant on this, on the things that we think are important, the things not just important for now, but also looking into the future, some direction, some strategy, specifically around all things AI. And you may already have been exposed to some of it or a lot of this in sessions done by Claris or by other people. So a lot of this will require a bunch of repetition. And so if you hear something that you've already heard, that's just fine. Again, a lot of the AI stuff is stuff that we will need to continue to think about what it means. How do we deploy this? All of this good stuff. So on our blog section of our website, you'll find everything that we've written up to this point, and it's quite a bit. I would highly recommend that you dive in and read a bunch of that. I'll be scrolling a fair bit, so my apologies for that. It's there. So this is the executive summary, and like I said, I'll use this as the guide. Feel free to interrupt me at any time. I'll try to keep an eye on the chat, and so will Allison. So if you have an urgent question, interrupt, and we will tackle the questions. I mentioned the marketing name is FileMaker 2025. The previous one was 2024, but I don't think it covers the what version we're really talking about, right? So I'll be using FileMaker 22 as opposed to say FileMaker 21.0 or 21.1, because it's kind of important that we're accurate in what we are talking about and what we compare it against. In a lot of the sessions that you've seen from Claris, and I participated in a community live last week, talk about running your local model server or AI model server, and what that means. We can go into a lot of detail about that as well. And yes, we'll put the links in the chat there. There'll be a bunch of session notes that either we'll put in the chat, but we'll email out after this session as well, so that you have all the links that I'm talking about. One thing that I want to show you, because it's kind of crucial for all things AI in general, specifically on what it means to integrate with any AI provider, whether you run your AI models locally or you use a commercial provider of any shape and form. And I make that point early on in the executive summary. All AI integration is just another API call. And most of us by now are familiar with making API calls to any of the providers that are out there, whether it's Microsoft 365 or QuickBooks or anything like that. So certainly at Soliant, we're intimately familiar with all kinds of integrations. It's what we do all day long, but many of you have as well. And I think this can help demystify a little bit what it means to integrate with an AI provider, because fundamentally it's exactly what you see here on the screen. It's just another API call, meaning that you'll have a URL with an endpoint. You'll send it a payload, which is basically what model you want to talk to, and then over here in the messages, that's the prompt, that's the question that you ask of the AI model. And when it's successful, you'll get JSON back. In that JSON, you will have one or more messages, kind of depends on how complex the answer is. You'll have one or more messages that is the content of which is the answer to the question that you're asking. And at the bottom, you'll get some information about tokens that you will have used to ask the question and for the AI model to generate the answer. We'll come back to this later in the session, but the number of tokens is important, whether you're using a local AI model, and certainly when you use a commercial provider. All commercial providers charge you by the millions of tokens. So as you develop as a developer, keep an eye on that token usage. And there's actually a new get function in FileMaker that will give you that. I'll show you a FileMaker script a little later. So FileMaker returns that data that is in that JSON that you get back from the AI provider, and it keeps track of the of the tokens that you use. So as you're developing, it's good to basically just tally those up, even when you use a local model, because it'll allow you to see how much it would cost you if you were using a commercial provider, or when you use something like AWS Bedrock, which typically also charges by the millions of tokens, even though it's still private, as if the AI model was running locally. So what I'm trying to say here is keeping track of the tokens that you use, both for asking the question and for generating the answer, is kind of critical, because it'll give you really good information about what this would cost you. But fundamentally, keep this in the back of your mind. It's just another API call. And those script steps that FileMaker has given us, which are really these, the newer ones: perform find by natural language, perform RAG actions, semantic, perform SQL query, and then generate response from model. Those are basically just wrappers around the insert from URL script step that you would use for any API integration, right? So that's the link between when I say it's just another API call and what FileMaker gives you, which are these script steps. These script steps are just a fancy form of the insert from URL. Anything you do or that you would want to do against an AI model provider, you can actually do with the insert from URL. There are some caveats, but in essence, you can do that same thing, right? So keep that in mind. These script steps are just a fancy form of the insert from URL. Now, these script steps that we have here, and there's some functions, new functions as well. I mentioned the new get function already, but let's focus on the script steps. These are the script steps that we have. Some of them we've already had in FileMaker 21.0 and 21.1, namely all of the embedding ones, where you can generate embeddings of your data, generate embeddings of your images, and then do semantic search on those images. That already existed in the previous version of FileMaker, so namely 21.0 and 21.1. What's new in FileMaker 22 is that we have all of the script steps that fall in this category, where you can use a text generation model instead of just the embedding models that we've already had in previous versions, right? So this is something that I've shown in my Community Live webinar with Claris. It's also in our white papers and blog context, because it's important for you as a developer to know, if you want to use a particular part of functionality, which of the AI models that you will be making calls to. It's not so important if you want to use, say, OpenAI or Cohere or Anthropic, because they will sort of automatically do that for you. But if you want to make the decision to run these AI models locally, you will need to know which model you need to host and which models you need to download and work with that. From our blog content in the executive summary, but also what Sarah Severson has written weeks ago, we take a bit of a stance around what it means integrating with an AI model provider. We have the commercial providers, I mentioned them, the ones that Claris supports, OpenAI, Cohere, Anthropic, versus running your own AI model server, basically taking the LLM, the model that you want, and running it on your own infrastructure. That is the method that we prefer, and we prefer it for important reasons. We prefer it for privacy and for security. Keep in mind, when you use these script steps, pretty much all of them, whether you generate embeddings or you ask questions or you ask the model to generate a SQL query for you or do a find for you, you will be sending either data to the AI provider, or you will be sending intellectual property to the AI provider, namely the schema of your solution, the table structure, the relationships between those, all of these things. So if you value your data, if you value the intellectual property of your solution, you will probably not want to send either of that to a commercial provider. And that really means that the most likely way to deploy using AI models is to run them yourself. So that's our stance. We're not being dogmatic about this. We explain the reasons in the executive summary as well. We're not dogmatic about it. If you really want to integrate with OpenAI or Cohere or Anthropic, we will certainly help you. But it needs to be part of a conversation about privacy and security. There is a cost aspect to it as well. Obviously, when you run your models locally, it's a one-time expense to get the hardware to run those models. The models themselves are free, most of them. So you don't pay for the millions of tokens. what you would do when you use a commercial provider. So that could be part of a return on investment kind of thing, but the intangible in that return on investment equation or calculation is that privacy and security. How do you put a price on that, right? So that's why we say the cost aspect of that is, if you look at privacy, security, and the cost aspect is the lesser of the three by far, right? So security and all of these things are way more important. All right. I'll move on to some of the other features that we have in the release. I can circle back to AI and show you a lot more detail. Put it in the chat if you want me to focus on any area of deploying your own models, using a commercial provider, anything like that. There's plenty of content. We actually have more content that we can fit in an hour. So help guide us on anything that you find important that you want us to focus on. Actually, there's one more slide on this AI stuff without going into more detail about the actual, what it means to host your model and all of that stuff. One thing that we see that we need to keep an eye on as developers, as consultants, are these four things, right? It's one thing to say, I have a need for a chat window in my solution, and I need to pick a model, and I need to know how to deploy that model or use one of the commercial providers. Beyond that, there are skills that we will need to acquire as developers, as consultants, whether you're an in-house developer or a part of a shop like we are. And it's this, right? We already mentioned some of the deployment choices that you will have. Do you want to use a commercial provider? Do you want to run your own models? If you want to run your own models, what does that even look like, right? What kind of machine do I need? What kind of hardware resources do I need? Can I put them in the cloud? Yes or no? What does that look like if I put it in the cloud? Can I use serverless? I already mentioned Bedrock. Can I use Bedrock? What does that look like? So all of those are deployment options that we need to think through and that we need to acquire skills for to basically help our clients. The second bullet that's there is the data readiness. Most of our solutions have been collecting data for a long, long time. But most of our solutions are, I call it transactional by nature, meaning we have a lead, we follow up with that lead, there's some communication with that lead, we make a sale, we generate an invoice for that sale, we do some reporting on those sales, and then rinse, repeat. We repeat the process. In the course of that, we do collect a lot of information, and that information is largely locked in. It's kind of difficult to ask questions of that data using the traditional FileMaker tools. Sure, we can devise reports. You can think of reports. We can find the FileMaker finds and queries. We can create layouts that do all of that. It's an area where AI really shines. And the example that I always use, it's I'm in Detroit and it's raining and it's Wednesday. Who should I be calling? Because historically, based on these parameters, I get the best success of making sales, right? So those are the kind of questions that are kind of hard to ask of your data in traditional fashion. But in order to ask those questions in an AI fashion, our data needs to be ready for that, right? Our data needs to be clean enough. Fortunately, AI doesn't care too much about structure versus unstructured data, but still, it's something that you need to look at to say, if I ask questions of the data in my current state, am I going to get relevant answers? Are my answers going to be correct based on the state of my data? So there's a data readiness aspect, some prep work that we need to look at our solutions to make sure that they can answer those questions correctly. And then the AI validation. If you were at Engage, you've seen a demo that Ronnie Rios did, where basically it was a conversation between him and the solution, and he was asking to generate a report. And I think reporting dashboards, that's a big use case area for all things AI. But if the AI returns you a bar chart, how do you know that it's accurate, right? As a developer, and certainly as a business owner, that's a concern, right? How do I validate that what I get from AI is actually accurate? That means that we as developers, as consultants, will have to find ways to do that, to give that reassurance that those answers are actually accurate. And then AI evaluation is what happens post-deployment. How do we continue to track whether there's no AI drift, where the AI isn't starting to hallucinate 3 months down the road based on some additional data, right? So we need to make sure that whatever validation we did up front remains accurate, that we keep consistently getting the right answers during the lifespan of the solution. And then, of course, asking the questions. That's what prompt engineering is all about. If we will let users ask questions of the data, it is almost impossible to get accurate answers without also providing extra prompts that set the context, that put some guardrails around the answers and sorry, the questions and the answers. And that will be up to the developers, right? So whoever creates the AI integration will need to make sure that those prompts that the user gives us are reformatted or that there's context added to that. And that's the whole dark art of prompt engineering. That's not something that we can expect our end users to have. That is something that we will need to bring to the table as developers, as consultants, to make sure that these AI integrations are actually working very well. So these are skills that we will need to acquire. We've already begun at Soliant. Obviously, that's why we have listed them. But it's going to make for some very interesting content and collective community learning as we all go through this journey. Most of us are new to this journey or have just begun, right? So don't feel bad if this is all new or you go like, oh, I don't have those skills. Almost nobody has those skills, right? So it's more just the process of acquiring those skills and how we can help each other in getting to that point. So some of that is outlined here at the beginning of that of the executive summary, and I apologize for the screening. I want to pause here a bit, and I have a couple of servers that I can show at any point in the presentation if you want to jump into some details. When you deploy the new FileMaker Server 22, you will see this new AI Services tab on your admin console. That doesn't mean that you should enable that AI services on your main FileMaker server machine. I would implore you, don't do that, right? If you've seen my community live webinar, and we can go into a lot of details, an AI model server requires vastly different resources than a FileMaker server. It needs GPUs, it needs a lot of video RAM. A typical FileMaker server doesn't have those. So if you enable this on your main FileMaker server, and certainly on your production FileMaker server, and you start downloading models, and some of these models are huge. Some of these models are 10, 20, 30, 60 gigabytes worth of data that you download, and then all of that needs to go into memory. You don't want to do that on your FileMaker server, on your main FileMaker server, right? So don't do that. You basically have to set up a separate AI model server for that, and that's where you deploy that. So that AI services tab is really just a wrapper around the Python microservice that is the AI model server. And we've already had that since FileMaker 21.1. This is just a different way to install it, and Claris wrapped it in the FileMaker server installer. Again, doesn't mean that you should run this on your main production server. Heather has a question there. Do we have a timeline for upgrading the Soliant hosted servers? We do. It's tentative at this point because we're monitoring the community and see what issues the guinea pigs run into, right? So we want to stand on the shoulders of giants or the pioneers, if you will. Obviously, we've spun up dozens of servers during beta testing, so we have a sense of the stability and the performance and all of that. But for our fleet, the current timing is probably going to be in the August timeframe. If you have an urgent need for the 22 features and you're a Soliant Cloud host client of ours, reach out to us, right? So we can always upgrade you ad hoc if you don't want to wait for the planned rollout so that everybody gets 22. So we can definitely work with you if that's something that you want to do. However, one thing that we will do on our Soliant Cloud service is this AI services tab is not going to be there. And if you want to, you can do that yourself. And let me jump real quick. We described that as well. There's a feature flag. If you have a Claris config, a JSON file, and the blog explains where to install that file, you can disable the AI server by setting the disable AI server flag to true in that Claris config JSON file, and that will prevent the AI services tab to show up. You would do that obviously on your production server, FileMaker server, right? So If you think it's risky to have it exposed, maybe an admin says, "Oh, this looks interesting. Let me toggle that on and see what happens." So if that's a risk that you'd rather not take, you can use this feature flag to disable that on your main production server. Right. And I mentioned this, but this is a table. I have a Mac Studio that I use as my AI model server. So this is what it is. It's an M4 Max. It has 128 gigs of memory in its. And if I load one of each model, because the AI model server can host one image embedding model, one text embedding model, and one text generation model. So if I host one of those three, it's already using, and I leave it at that. I'm not putting any load on the server. It's already using 43 gigs of memory just by having those models loaded. If I were to use RAG or retrieval augmented generation, where I keep adding my own data to the AI model, that number would only go up. And that number would go up if I put some load, like if I have 5, 10, 20 users asking for AI questions of those models, then, or I start running embeddings, then that memory usage would go up significantly. In beta testing on that same server, I had it up easily to about 80, 90 gigs of RAM, right? So that's why when I say it uses resources way differently than a typical FileMaker server, then that's one of the main reasons, right? So if you have a FileMaker server machine that has 16 gigs of RAM, 32 gigs of RAM, which is a fairly typical amount of memory for a FileMaker server, then none of this would fit, right? So this will make your FileMaker server fall over. Jonathan asks a question, can those AI services started by the command line? No, there is no FMS admin command line for it. At least I haven't seen one. I haven't to be honest, I haven't checked against the production, the actual final one release. The beta one was about 2 builds before the actual released one, but I don't think that there is. But if there was, the feature flag would definitely not allow that to happen. The feature flag does more than just take the UI away. It actually stops the model AI server from running. So even if there was a command line or an API way to toggle the AI services, it would stop. It just wouldn't run. MCP server. There is no MCP server. For those who are not familiar with MCP, a model context protocol, which is the next wave in AI. At that point, we're talking about agentic AI. AI, and especially chat AI, so in essence, text generation AI, is where you ask a question and it generates an answer for you, right? That's just text generation. The next step in that is where you interact with your AI, and for instance, you ask it to draft an email, and then you go through a couple of iterations to get the email just right. The next step is to say, we now have a properly formatted email. The tone is just right. I like the context. Go ahead and send this email to my top 10 clients, right? That's where agentic AI comes in. That's not possible with just a chat implementation that we currently have, right? So this would require an MCP server, and that's where this is going, right? This is why we want to mention it, because we want you to start thinking about what that will look like. What kind of features would you want in your solution if you could have that, where you can not just only chat with AI, but then have your AI take the next step, do an action, whatever that may be. It could be sending something to a Slack channel or sending an email, as I just mentioned. So this is where it's going, and this is what we're already experimenting with at Soliance. All right, enough about AI. I can circle back to AI and show you some practical stuff, time permitting. We're close to the half-hour mark. This is the next big thing. Besides AI, the solution upgrade tool is something, it's not new, right? So this is not new to FileMaker 22. What's new in FileMaker 22 is that we're getting extremely close to getting this finished. And in a nutshell, what this tool allows us to do is we give it a well-formatted bit of XML. We point it at the FileMaker file and say, I want to add these 2 scripts, modify that other script, add a layout, modify those 2 other layouts, And by the way, delete those 3 fields that I no longer need. That's what's going to be in the XML. We give it to the tool, which is the solution upgrade tool, and it'll make those changes inside our FileMaker solution. This is huge, and it's huge for a number of reasons. All of the go-lives that all of us FileMaker developers have been doing for decades have been taken the form of, we have our development copy of the file, we drop all the data from that, we use that as a new empty clone that will become the production one. We take the production file, we move all the data into our copy of the development file. Used to be we had to script all of that, and it could be a very lengthy process. Along the way, we were given the data migration tool, which makes this a lot faster. And not only faster, because it's a command line tool, we can automate it. AutoFMS is a great example of that, where it's automating a lot of that under the hood stuff. We have our own tools at Soliant that do some of these things. The solution update tool will allow us to have more choices when it comes to go live, right? So instead of moving data around, maybe we can now just move schema around, right? So maybe we can say, okay, show me all the stuff that we've done since the last go live. We compile that into that XML, we feed it to the solution update tool, and voila, away we go, right? So that's one obvious benefit. The other main benefit, and all of that is automatable, right? Like if we're talking about having fully automated continuous deployment pipelines where I'm a developer, I make a change, I hit one button, and it basically makes it the whole round trip into the production file. This is a command line tool. All of this could be automated in that fashion. And this is the way that a lot of other platforms and environments work in, right? So the industry has been moving in that direction for a long, long time. This is the thing that will unlock that potential for anything that has to do with FileMaker. Version control, right? If we can take the save as XML output of our file, we diff it against the previous version, which will give us a much smaller XML that is just the changes, and we store just the changes. And we store that in Git or any of the version controls that you have. That is huge. We have a dedicated blog post around this. This is by Mislav Kos that writes about this extensively. Needless to say, we're spending a lot of time on this, researching what the Save as XML looks like to make this possible, all of these things. So we actually have 2 blog posts, this one specifically about the upgrade tool. So if you haven't really paid attention much to what the upgrade tool means, this is a great read. Then we have this one that basically talks about the thing that makes it happen, which is the Save as XML structure. Any FileMaker file can be expressed, if you will, as XML. That's not new. We had the DDR, XML DDR, database design report, for a long, long time. Save as XML is the newer version of exactly that. So this describes that. And we actually took it one step further. Because the trick, as you may have picked up from my story here, is that if I have my old version and my new version, right? So my development version before I started my next feature, my development version currently after I've done with this feature, what's the difference between the two? Because that will be the basis for generating that XML file that I need to give to the patch tool. All right. This is open source, so you're free to download this. This is a tool created by Mislav. OOE stands for one of everything. So basically, we're experimenting with, because this is all about schema, right? Like fields, field options, layouts, parts of layouts, scripts, a script step. So all of these things that are FileMaker schema. So this is a tool that will help you keep track of what that XML looks like if you want to add a field, remove a field, add a button to a layout, completely replace a layout, right? So that's what this tool is all about. So feel free to download it, play with it. If you feel like that, absolutely contribute to it. That's the heart of open source, right? So. All right, so I'm just keeping an eye there on the chat. Essam was asking a question about implementing RAG, and again, RAG stands for Retrieval Augmented Generation within the existing FileMaker solution. Sure, let's jump through that real quick. So we're going to go back to AI real quick. This is a demo file. Let's go to some of the RAG things. So these are 3 script steps that I have that deal with RAG. Actually, I should probably start by showing an actual FileMaker server. This looks like a FileMaker server. It's not a FileMaker server. It's an AI model server, right? So again, remember the AI model server is just wrapped around the FileMaker installer or wrapped in the FileMaker installer and the admin console. As you can see, it has no files hosted whatsoever. I've actually disabled any connections from clients in case I accidentally host a file. The database cache has been set to absolute minimum so that I have the maximum amount of memory available. AI services has been enabled. That's here. And RAG has been enabled as well, right? So that's really all it takes from a deployment point of view to make this AI model server a RAG server. To explain briefly, retrieval augmented generation is a way that you can feed your own data to an AI model. And there's really basically two ways of doing that. The other one is this one, fine-tuning, right? So all models, all AI models are generically trained. We download the models have been created by somebody else based on a vast amount of data that it's out there. What it is not trained on is your data, specifically about your domain, your business, anything that is relevant to you, right? So RAG and fine-tuning try to solve that problem, and they solve it in a different way. Fine-tuning actually takes a base model and you change the model by basically retraining or fine-tuning the model. So the Claris AI model server allows for that. I don't think many of us will go there. This is very specialized work, and it requires a lot of knowledge, in-depth knowledge about how models are trained to begin with. What does the training data look like? And not only do you need a bunch of training data, you also need data then to validate that the model has learned or has been tuned to your liking. So it's entirely possible. We're probably, well, we're going to use it, but I don't see a lot of users going that way. RAG is a whole lot simpler. Again, RAG aims to do the same thing. You have a generically trained model, but you leave that model be, and you just feed it a lot of data. And you can feed it that data in PDF format or in pure text format. Think of your catalog of products. Or if you're a company like ours, we have a lot of Confluence or wiki pages with information, things that we've done, things that we've learned, best practices. So we can PDF those, we can feed them to the model, and now the model can use that to, when it generates an answer, it'll consider the extra data that you've given it. So that's the context. What it looks like inside FileMaker is the first thing that you'll need to do is you'll need to add that data to the RAG model. Again, on the server side, it's basically just saying, toggling that setting on and say, yep, I want to use RAG. It's really that simple. In this case, I have here, right? So we have the script step called perform RAG action. You provided the account, the space ID, that's all fine. And you have these actions. Sorry, let me highlight that, right? So you have an add data action, remove data action. That is basically if you don't trust that data or the data is stale, you can remove it, and then you can send a prompt. That's really all that there is to it from a FileMaker point of view, right? So, and as you can see here, I'm doing this in a loop. I had PDF'd all of the knowledge base, the Claris knowledge base articles. There's about 2,000 PDFs. So when I ask questions as a developer, I wanted to basically factor in everything that Claris knows. So that's what I was doing with this script. So it's basically just a loop. I feed it PDF by PDF. It's typically, it's like a burst action. It's a bulk action. I do this once whenever I want to add the RAG data, and away you go. So that's really what it is. Nothing more fancy than that. If that doesn't answer the question, just circle back and let me know. All right, so yep, we're talking about the patch updates tool. It's huge, right? It's not finished, but we're getting really, really close. So, and because it's finished, you may go like, well, if it's not finished, I'm not going to look at it. I think we all need to be looking at it because it is going to fundamentally change how we build solutions, how we deploy solutions, how we track solutions, how we can work with our customers who insist on things like version control, right? So so now's the time to do that, and that's what we're doing at Soliant. That's what Mislav was writing about, and Mislav will have a webinar like this one to talk about specifics for this. So now's the time to start thinking about this because it is really important. This is catching some people out, so I want to pause here real briefly. When you have FileMaker Pro 22, FileMaker Pro 22 can only connect to FileMaker Server 22 or 21, right? It cannot connect to FileMaker Server 20 or 19. Obviously, for Soliant Cloud customers, that's not an issue. Everybody is already on a compatible version of FileMaker Server. But if you haven't updated your FileMaker Server beyond 20, if you haven't jumped on 21.0 or 21.1, then don't deploy the FileMaker 22 clients because it simply will not connect. And we're starting to see some community reports of people being caught out for that, especially if on the client side you hadn't disabled upgrade notifications, which basically allows the client to say, oh, there's a new version, let's click this button and install the new version. If your FileMaker server is not compatible, that can really catch you out. So keep that in mind, right? But the opposite is equally true. Don't update to FileMaker server 22 if you still have clients that are on 20 or 19 or older, right? So it works both directions. All right, the next big thing in our estimation is this JSON performance improvement. And let me explain a little bit what that is all about. If you have JSON like this as you're all intimately familiar with the JSON structure, what we're looking at here is an array of JSON objects, right? So the square brackets meaning it's an array. It has 3 elements in it, and every element is a JSON object by itself, right? So before FileMaker 22, if you wanted to parse this in a loop, right? So you say, I know it's an array, so I'll just iterate over that, and I'll extract every JSON object on its own, and then I'll parse that JSON object. So what would happen is you would do a JSON get element against that array and say, I want the first element, and I'll put it in its own variable, and then I'll use JSON get variable. Oh, sorry, the JSON get variable. Sorry, let me try that again. The JSON get element on this new variable. What happens before FileMaker 22 is that FileMaker could only hold one parsed JSON object in memory. And in the beginning, it would be this one. It's the bigger one. But as soon as you do JSON get element, it would basically blow away the cache for this one, the parsed object, and it would say, I'm keeping this one in memory. So when you go back to this and say, now give me the second element, FileMaker would have to reparse this big one until you basically set it in this one, and then you start working like you use a JSON get element to get the name, then it would parse this one. So you can see where I'm going with this. FileMaker would have to constantly blow away the cache between this and this as it stores in variable, and that makes iterating or looping over a big chunk of JSON really, really slow, right? Because of that constant reparsing and blowing away the cache as it's doing that. FileMaker 22 completely changes that. FileMaker 22 can now hold in memory a cached object for each JSON element or JSON variable that you want to have, that you want to use. And this is major. This changes the performance of iterating over big JSON a million times. And there's some good reports out there. Beeswax just released a blog post about this, just highlighting, they don't have any details or a demo file, but just highlighting a parsing routine that they had where it went from minutes to sub-seconds, right? That's the order of magnitude of the change in this. And of course, it will not surprise you that we have a blog post about that, right? So if you want to know a lot more details and think about that, then this will get you, it'll give you the backgrounds, and will get you start thinking about where in your existing routines you may now use some of these new functions. So FileMaker 22, you don't really need to change a lot of your existing code to take advantage of that, because FileMaker just natively does its memory management a whole lot differently and by itself. Although there is a new function called JSON parse that you can use to good effect to basically explicitly take control of telling FileMaker, here's JSON, parse it, which really means put it in memory and keep it in memory as its own thing. And you may have multiple of those. So as a developer, you now have explicit control over that, which is where we all want to end up. These are some smaller changes that are there. A word of caution with this one. Well, a caution is probably putting it too strongly. Under the hood, Claris uses a different library for the SQL queries. They've updated to a completely new version of that library. So before you install 22 on your clients, if your solutions do a lot of SQL, and I mean execute SQL internal to the solutions, but also external SQL, if you use ODBC or JDBC from the outside to touch your FileMaker solutions, do some solid testing on your solutions. Figure out if it's fast or slow. It should be faster. But I would say, you know me, I'm a belts and suspenders guy, right? So so do some testing if you know that your solution relies heavily on using execute SQL or any kind of SQL. There's some extra functionality that's listed there that you can read that it brings, but fundamentally, it's really about that change in library that may change the performance or how it behaves. I haven't heard anything from the community at this point about this, but again, belts and suspenders. If it was my solution, I would spend a little bit of time testing that and going through some of these. This one is such a small thing, but my level of joy about this one is out of proportion with the size of the feature. But I absolutely love this. When you do replaces, bulk replaces, and you do them in a scripted fashion, it doesn't work if you do a manual replace. You now have the option to not trigger auto-enter fields, right? It's the thing that when we do a go live and we add a field to a table, and as part of the go live, we have to run a post-deployment task to populate that field with a bunch of data to make it relevant. That always gave us pause, right? Because we want everybody to have in their tables fields like who was the last modified user, the last modified timestamp, to keep track of some high-level auditability of those records in those tables. And if we had to run a replace as part of a go live task, that would completely blow that away, right? Because we would be the last one modifying all the records, and the timestamp would be the moment that we did the go live. I hated that. So this one takes care of that, where we can now say we run a scripted replace and we toggle that off. So the original timestamp and the original owner for the record will survive. Yeah, I see that Tom loves that too. It's like it's great. It's great. You got to have that, right? All right, so we didn't spend too much time here in the executive summary on this one, but we do have a blog post about that. That is this one here. This too is going to change how we create solutions to some extent. It's a very easy way to capture all of the record IDs of your current found set and transporting that somewhere else. So basically rebuilding that found set in another place. You can do that for, say, back navigation. If you want to maintain the breadcrumbs of where the user was in your solution, so you can keep track of that. So if when the user says, I want to go back, I've just done a find and I now have 10 records. I really wanted to have the 50 records that I had before I did the find. So this allows to do that. The other obvious use case is for perform script on server. As we know, that doesn't inherit the found set of the user client side. So this is a very good way. And not only is it good, it's very, very fast to basically say, take a snapshot of my found set and recreate it on the server side. So I absolutely love this feature. And this is a good time to to consider what some of the alternatives were, like the list of summary fields. I've talked about this a lot. I hate having to add utility fields to tables, like summary fields or stuff like that. And with utility fields, I mean fields that really don't contain data that is relative to the entity. Like if I have a table called vehicles, I want all my fields to describe that vehicle. I don't want to have a bunch of fields in there that I need as a developer. The summary list of was one of the big exceptions because it was a great way of doing that and it was really fast. Now I have this feature. I don't have to have these summary fields anymore. I have the same speed, I have the same behavior, and I don't have to have the fields. So small things make me happy. All right, so there's a bunch of other things in here. Code folding, as developers, we will all love that. Nothing much to say. One of the things that I really like, it's the way that they draw their lines. If you ever worked in VS Code, like many of us have, or any other environment, it's the same thing, where it basically draws a line between the beginning and the end of any block, whether it's an if or a switch or a case statement or anything like that. So it does the same thing. And now we can fold them and do all of these things. This one makes people very happy too, right? The fact that we can now leave comments on our tables describing the table and then pick them up later. That's pretty cool. I mentioned this already. AI services don't need to spend too much time in here, except to reiterate that you really do not want to do that on your production server. If you want to do that on your development server, I would say it's fine. However, I don't think many of us have development servers that are even capable of doing this, right? AI needs a lot of graphics processing unit power, whereas FileMaker server uses CPUs or central processing unit power, which is totally different than GPUs. And if you GPUs, you need to have the type of memory that comes with GPUs, which is VRAM or video RAM. Typically, our machines don't have that. If you know me and you followed me over the years, you may have heard me say that I'm not a big fan of using Macs as FileMaker servers, mainly because it's consumer grade hardware. I'm going to have to change my stance on that when it comes to AI model servers. They're great machines for that, and for one specific reason. Well, for a lot of reasons. The way that Macs are built, and I'm talking about things like the Mac Studio specifically, although you can get a beefed up Mac Mini, you'll need a lot of memory and a lot of GPU power in it, but depending on the models that you want to run, you can do that. But say a Mac Studio, the memory that's in a Mac Studio is what is called unified memory, meaning that it can double as regular memory for the CPU or as video memory for the GPUs, which is great. Because if you get a machine with 128 gigs of RAM, like my Mac Studio, I'm not bound to the amount of memory that is specific for the video RAM, right? If you use Windows or Linux, you have to get an NVIDIA graphics card for it, and then you're tied to the memory that's on the card for the amount of VRAM that you can use for loading these models and whatnot. So, it's pretty great. How are we doing for time? We have about 10 minutes left. Yep, Lynn makes a good point there in the chat about the field comments, the LLM tag that you can put in there. Your question, Lynn, is can you put it in the middle of the comments? I haven't tried. I would put it at the front, because I think that's where it'll get picked up if it reads it. I'm not sure if it's smart enough to pick it up from the middle of it, but it's certainly worth a try. And the context for this is that if you tag fields with this LLM tag, they can then be used for those interactions when you have to send schema or parts of your schema to the AI model, right? Those two script steps that we talked about, where the AI can actually perform a find in your database or give you the SQL query that matches your natural language query. It can only do that, specifically generating the SQL query. It can really only do that if it knows the structure of your tables and your fields, right? So these tags that you could put in field comments can help narrow down the fields that you want to expose and want to have discoverable, if you will, to AI. Because maybe you have some of those utility fields in your table, like some of those summary fields or some of the other fields that you don't want to expose to your AI because they're meaningless when it comes to data, right? So that's that. What I have on the screen there is not something that is specifically new to FileMaker 22, although Claris has made some changes in FileMaker 22 to make it a little more digestible, if you will. This is something that actually started changing in FileMaker Server 21.1.3. There's been a 21.3, 21.1.4, and a 21.1.5 since, right? So we have different versions of FileMaker Server where this is true. What we now have is this. It's a new setting in the admin console for your FileMaker Server where you have the threshold before the FileMaker Server scripting engine, which is one of the 3 scripting engines on FileMaker Server. The FMSE scripting engine is the one used by Perform Script on Server, by your server-side schedules, and by your OData API calls. When you have OData API calls that run a script, the FMSE is the scripting engine that takes care of that. So in 21.1.3, there was a new behavior that if you have your 51st simultaneous, so concurrent request to the FileMaker Server scripting engine, the 51st one would get queued. It would not be skipped, right? Because there's another setting that's been around for a long, long time that is the maximum number of PSOS sessions that you can have. The default for that is 100. You can scale it up to 500. The difference between the two is that old setting, if you had a 101st session, a Perform Script on Server session that you wanted, that one would actually just fail. FileMaker Server would throw an error at you to say, host capacity is exceeded. I believe the error is 812, right? So that one would fail. The 51st one in this one, right? So it's set to 50 by default. The 51st one would not fail. It would just go on a queue, and it would wait for any one of those 50 that are currently being executed to be done, so that the 51st comes off the queue and would get processed. What it means in real practical terms is that depending on the load that you put on your FileMaker Server, through schedules, through PSOS, or through the OData API, you may find yourselves that seemingly inexplicably, it's slower than you would expect it, and that's because of this queuing, right? And actually, in 21.1.3 all the way to 5, this is not a setting that you could change. It was a setting that was originally set very, very low at 5 or something like that. So now it's something that you have control over. If you set this to a really high number, you basically revert your FileMaker Server back to the old behavior before this queuing happens. So that's one way of doing that. Now, the reason that this queue exists is it's kind of easy to overload your FileMaker Server with a bunch of Perform Script on Server requests, right? So you gotta be careful to make sure that as developers, and it's an easy trap to fall into. I talk about this a lot on the community, and when I talk at Engage and other sessions, it's an easy trap for developers to fall into when we're developing against our development server and we're the only ones on that development server. We have a long-running routine. And we say, well, it takes the client a while to do that. I'll just throw it at the server and it'll be much faster. And it is, as we're developing and testing. But in production, with 20, 50, 60, 100 users on the server may be so busy with other tasks that throwing a bunch of Perform Script on Server at it doesn't really make your server faster, right? It can actually make your server slower, and not just slower for that one task, but slower overall. So this queue was really meant to put a safeguard into that, an automatic safeguard by Claris to say, if you overload your server and they think 50 is overloading it, then it'll go on a queue to make sure that the server has enough spare resources for all of the myriad of other things that it needs to do. Tom had a question. We're still talking about the tagged fields for AI there. The the answer to that is yes, Tom. Right? Like if you start tagging fields, it will only look at the tagged fields. If that answers your question there. All right, so let's continue to go. OData API. This is, as developers or as people who have solutions, this is, in my book, falls in that same category as the patch tool. It's something that we need to pay attention to right now. If you're using a lot of data API in your solutions, start thinking about switching to the OData API. The reason for that is the data API is not officially deprecated. I'm not saying that. But in everything that we're hearing from Claris, at Engage, at their own webinars, it is clear that the OData API will continue to be developed. The data API will not get a lot of love going forward, right? They're not going to yank it from the product. I'm not saying that. So you're safe for now. But we're forewarned is really what I'm trying to say, right? So we will have a lot of leeway to cut over, but now's the time to start looking at this. If you're not familiar with the OData API, now's the time to start looking at that and prepping your solutions for that OData API. The OData API, by the way, it's really powerful. It's way more powerful than the data API. So it may feel like a chore and a bit of a drag to having to switch over, but believe me, once you get going with the OData API, you'll never look back. It's a powerful thing. If you really like your SSL certificates free, Claris Server has made the integration with Let's Encrypt even more simple, right? So when you install your FileMaker server and you go to the admin console for the first time, right off the bat, this is not new. The first question or the third question, we've already had those, but now you can request a Let's Encrypt certificate right there, like as soon as you have your FileMaker server up and running. And you can also do that from inside the configuration SSL certificates area. You can request a Let's Encrypt certificate there. We could do that in the previous version of FileMaker Server. It was a lot more convoluted with schedules and whatnot. You'll still need a schedule for the renewal, but the original request is now way simpler, and it's very easy to do. And you can do that from the admin API there as well. This is new. If your solutions use a lot of WebDirect, I would encourage you to start looking at this on your development server. Put some load on WebDirect. Configure your FileMaker server to use Nginx instead of IIS, which is the default web server on Windows. So that's something to consider. Nginx is more powerful. It's leaner than IIS. So I'm not saying that you will get a performance boot, because that depends on how your WebDirect solution is built. But definitely have a look at that. And if you want us to have help you out, look at your WebDirect solution, vet it for performance, all of that stuff. But this is pretty great. The fact that we can use Nginx on Windows should give us some more power that we can squeeze out of WebDirect's solutions, right? So that's there. And with that, we're at time. We're also at the end of these things. I'm going to leave you with this last little thing about WebDirect. So this is the browser, right? This back button here that all browsers have has plagued us for a long time, right? So if the user's that, it really kills their WebDirect session when they do that. So at the very least, we'll now have a warning that the user will have, like, are you sure you want to leave? And they can back out of using the back button, right? So again, it's a very, very small thing, but it can really be powerful for any WebDirect solution that you have out there, and cut down on the number of complaints that you get from your users. So that's that. I'm happy to hang around a little while longer if you have any questions or if you want to chime in. Taylene was asking, is the HTTPS tunneling only used for WebDirect? No, it's anything that goes through IIS, right? Or used to go through IIS. So basically, it completely replaces the IIS dependency of FileMaker Server with Nginx, right? So even the IIS for things like the data API or OData API really just acts as a reverse proxy. But yes, all of that will go to Nginx as well, not just WebDirect. All right, happy to revisit anything that you want to circle back to. I'm here for that. And thank you all for coming, by the way. Tom is asking a great question. Are we doing any vibe coding? In general, we do a lot of vibe coding, absolutely. For FileMaker, not so much, for two reasons. I already talked about AI models being generically trained, right? So that there are AI models that are trained to be great at assisting with code because they understand coding, they understand refactoring, they understand what it means to write code, right? So Gemma Code is a great example of an open source AI model that's by Google. That's great for that. Some of the Anthropic Claude models are great for that too. The body of knowledge that's out there for models to be trained on for things like JavaScript or C# or Java or C++, right, is way greater than any of the data that's available for models to be trained on FileMaker, right? So that's the main reason that we're not really doing that. That's reason one. Reason number two is we're basically waiting on that patch tool to be finished, right? Because I didn't mention that as a great example because the patch file, the XML file that we need to feed to the patch tool so that it can make schema changes in our solution. XML is great for AI because it's structured. Like there's a structure to that XML syntax. AI is great at generating that. As long as it's trained on how to generate that, it'll generate for that. So I can write, instead of having to do this save as XML, diff between two versions, generate that XML file, I can describe my field. Like I say, create a calculated field with this calculation that does this, that, and the other thing. And it'll generate the XML that I can then give to the patch tool for it to apply against my FileMaker file, right? So AI is going to be a great use case for that. We don't have it yet, right? So AI models aren't really trained on a solid base of knowledge about FileMaker, and the FileMaker Pro, as we know it, doesn't really have a good way of getting that code into our FileMaker, right? If you were at Engage, you've seen some demos from Claris to have AI assisted calculations and AI assisted scripts. So it's coming, right? It's inevitable. We'll have it. And one of the things that I'm talking to Claris about, by the way, is not just vibe coding. Well, I guess it falls under vibe coding, right? But we all know what the best practices are. We all know that if we make architectural decisions that end up being poor down the road, right, where our solution works great now with 5 users, and all of a sudden our company grows and we got 25 users, and the FileMaker solution that we built, it becomes a performance hog, right? And it's because of the choices that we made down the road. Maybe we have tables that are very wide, or we have too many unstored calculations in our solution, right? So we know these best practices. Imagine a world where you're adding fields to your table, or you're adding relationships to your graph, and AI will warn you to say, based on what I see in your solution, adding one more table occurrence to this spider is going to have a dramatic effect on the performance. I suggest that you do this instead, right? And I don't think we're far off with that, because we have the knowledge. It would just take training a model to do that, and then having the hooks in the platform to basically expose some of that AI. Yeah, well, our minds will be blown there, Thalim. It's some of this is going to be great for us, and I'm not afraid of any of this taking our jobs away. I truly don't believe that, and the main reason for that is we still need to know what we're building, right? The building of that is going to be way faster, potentially even more robust than we would do, because some of these AI agents will basically look over our shoulder and say, by the way, I wouldn't do it this way. I would do it this way, because you'll thank me later. So that's going to be way faster. But those skills that I mentioned, that slide of skills that I mentioned, some of this will be done down the road by AI agents, right? But fundamentally, it'll come down to us, whether we're good at that. Specifically, Tom, what part was a bit farther off in your mind? And while you're potentially writing an answer out there, there are some specific FileMaker model implementations out there. That script that I mentioned that is using RAG is the beginning of that. Like, it's a model that I use for my own because I've already fed it all of the Claris knowledge base, so it's already trained on everything that Claris knows and has in their support knowledge base. Agnes Riley has made a chat, so like a chat GPT thing specifically for FileMaker by doing the same thing, right? By taking a good code model and then supplementing a bunch of information about FileMaker. The thing that I worry about for models that are trained on generic, like not trained in with constraints, with guardrails, is that there's a lot of bad information about FileMaker out there too, right? Like FileMaker, it's ironically, it's one of the downsides of FileMaker having lasted for 40 years, right? Because a lot of the body of knowledge that's out there is no longer relevant, right? So I wouldn't want a model trained on that, right? I wouldn't want a model recommending that I use repeating fields instead of related records, right? But there's 20 years of knowledge that will speak to that, right? So I find that funny that it's FileMaker's history to some extent is working against it. As long as we talk about generically trained models, right? So training a model, and it would surprise me if Claris doesn't come up with their own trained model. Like, it's almost a given that at some point we'll see some of that. Oh, Tom answered there. I don't think it's far off where an AI agent will gently tap me on the shoulder and say, don't do that. I think that's not the wisest thing. And then tell me what some of the alternatives are, because isn't that what we do in code reviews with our people, right? Like, we have people writing code and somebody else looks at it, and part of the questions is, explain to me why you did that, not in a judgmental way. Like, if that's my tone, that's not how I do code reviews. But that's in essence, that's what it is, right? It's really just about, can you articulate why you did something a certain way, and can you explain to me what the 3 different alternatives are and why you discarded that, right? Again, a lot of this comes down to knowledge that we all have in our brains, right? So if we can dump that on a model, we can have some of that vibe coding where if we're not at our best in any given day, the AI model will make us go back to our best. Good question there. About the and this was not the SQL variant of that. This was the actual perform find, right? I would have thought that it would be forgiving to spelling mistakes like that, because models by and large are forgiving in that sense. So I'm a little surprised that it wouldn't have given you that. If you haven't posted on the community, so community.claris.com about this, definitely do, so that more people can chime in and have a conversation about that. I would be tempted. I know it's not the same thing, so that's why I'm hesitating. I would be tempted to use the SQL variant of that to see what the actual SQL query looks like. But now that I think about it, it may not be a good test, because the SQL variant is going to have the hard-coded string in there. So yeah, post that to the community. I would want to see what other people have to say about that. In FileMaker terms, right? What you're asking it to do is take that input and do a couple of OR searches, right? Where it says conference and conference and something like that. So that's what the equivalent could look like. So it kind of depends to some extent probably about what the query is and how complex it would be to do that. However, I'm going around in circles, so I apologize. So I'm just freewheeling here. Here's why I would expect the model to be better at that. I think because models are layers, right? Where it goes through a succession of steps inside itself. And one of the first ones to me would be spell check this before I do anything with that, right? So so in my mind, it should have caught the error before it executed the thing. So that's why I'm a little surprised.
Is this a good place to wrap up, Wim?
I think so.
Okay. Thank you all for coming. Thank you all for staying 12 minutes over. Our recording will go out automatically as soon as the video is done processing. And thank you, Wim, for everything you shared today.
My pleasure. Thank you all for being here.
You all have a wonderful day. Thank you.